He thought he was just saving one helpless puppy from drowning, but the second he turned around, 4 full-grown dogs were standing behind him in the water, silently watching. Were they about to attack or thank him? Most people think of dogs as loyal, sweet, and loving, but in the wild, they can be unpredictable, especially when it comes to protecting their young. Before I tell you what happened when the man returned to the forest, can I ask you one small thing? If you believe animals like Milo and his pack aren't just strays, but living, loyal souls who deserve a chance, please tap that subscribe button. Most people scroll past stories like this, but your one click could help this message reach someone who truly needs to hear it. It started out like any other afternoon. Jacob wasn't looking for trouble. He didn't expect anything unusual. All he wanted was some quiet time in nature, just him, his camera, and the peaceful sound of leaves rustling in the breeze. As a nature photographer, this was his escape. The forest had always been his safe place. That day, the sky was overcast but calm. Light filtered through the trees in soft beams, painting the dirt trail with streaks of gold. It was the kind of day that made everything feel a little slower, a little more still. The kind of day when your thoughts catch up to you and the world feels less noisy. Jacob, 34, had been working nonstop the past few months. City life had worn him down. Deadlines, emails, noise, constant motion. That's why he had packed up his old hiking boots, tossed his gear in the trunk of his Jeep, and driven out to the edge of Red Pine Forest, a stretch of woods known for its untouched trails and quiet streams. Just a few miles from town, but it felt like a world away. He had no idea how much that trip would change him. He adjusted the camera strap around his neck and made his way along the familiar path. Twigs cracked beneath his boots. Birds chirped overhead. Every so often, he'd pause to snap a photo. A squirrel perched on a branch, a cluster of mushrooms glowing under the moss, the distant outline of a deer disappearing between the trees. Everything felt peaceful, normal, safe, until it wasn't. As he rounded a bend near a shallow part of the river, he heard it, faint, barely noticeable, but unmistakable, a sound that cut through the forest's natural rhythm, a whimper. Jacob stopped in his tracks. The sound had come from the left, near the water's edge. He tilted his head, listening. Another whimper, this time a little louder, a little more desperate. It wasn't a bird, it wasn't the wind, it was something alive, something scared. He turned toward the river and slowly walked through the underbrush, pushing aside thick ferns and tall grass. His boots sank slightly into the damp soil as he got closer to the water. "Hello," he called softly, almost to himself. "Is someone there?" No response, just the gentle sound of the river flowing, and that tiny, heartbreaking cry. He stepped closer, careful not to make too much noise, and then he saw it. There, in the middle of the shallow stream, clinging to a mossy, slippery rock, was a tiny golden puppy. It looked no older than a few weeks, completely soaked, shaking, barely able to hold its body up. Its front paws were sprawled across the top of the rock, but its back legs were dangling in the current. Every few seconds, a gust of water pushed against its fragile frame, threatening to drag it under. Jacob's heart dropped. How did it get there? Where was its mother? Why was it alone? He didn't stop to ask those questions. His instincts kicked in. He knew he had seconds, maybe minutes, before the puppy was pulled under. Without thinking, he dropped his backpack, slung his camera behind him, and stepped into the river. The water was cold, much colder than he expected. It soaked through his jeans immediately, and the muddy bottom sucked at his boots, making every step heavier. He didn't care. The puppy let out another cry, as if sensing help had arrived, or maybe sensing it was slipping away. Jacob moved fast, using one arm to balance and the other to push through the current. Halfway there, he slipped on a rock hidden under the surface and nearly went down. The cold water splashed up to his chest. He gasped, steadying himself. The puppy saw him. Their eyes locked for a moment. It stopped crying. That look, pure fear and hope. He kept moving. Finally, he reached the rock. The puppy tried to lift itself higher, but its tiny legs trembled and collapsed. Jacob reached out slowly, trying not to scare it. It's okay, little one. I've got you," he whispered. The puppy didn't resist. It was too tired. Jacob gently scooped it up with both hands. Its small body fit perfectly in his palms. It was lighter than he expected, all bones and damp fur. He cradled it against his chest, then carefully placed it on his shoulder, where it clung with its tiny paws. The puppy rested its head on his collarbone, letting out the softest sigh. Jacob smiled just a little. Then he turned to make his way back. That's when he froze. On the other side of the river, just past the clearing he had walked through moments earlier, something moved. He blinked. For shapes, low to the ground, golden coats, steady eyes. Dogs, 4 full-grown dogs, standing just beyond the tall grass, still, watching, not barking, not growling, just staring. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. Wild dogs. Were they strays? Or worse, had he just taken a puppy from its family? He stayed still, not moving a muscle. His mind raced. Were they angry? Would they attack? Should he put the puppy down? The puppy on his shoulder didn't move, but its tiny ears twitched, and it let out a faint whine. One of the dogs took a step forward, then another. Jacob glanced at the river between them. Shallow, yes, but wide enough for a sprint if they charged. He whispered softly, more to himself than anyone. Hey, think, were they protective? Were they here to get the pup back? Or were they waiting to see what he would do? His heart pounded in his chest. Another dog stepped forward, into the water now. The puppy's body shifted. Its little paw reached out, toward the approaching dog. Jacob started to put the pieces together. These weren't just any dogs. This was the puppy's pack, its family. The way they stood, in a protective semicircle. The way their eyes never left the pup. The silence, the patience. They'd been watching the whole time. Maybe from the trees. Maybe hidden in the brush. Maybe they had tried to save the puppy earlier and failed. But now here he was, a human, holding their baby. Jacob slowly lowered himself to one knee, keeping the puppy safe on his shoulder. He wanted to show he wasn't a threat, that he meant no harm. The lead dog, a slightly older male, with a white patch on his nose, stepped fully into the stream. His eyes locked with Jacob's, calm, serious, steady. He wasn't growling. He wasn't snarling. He was assessing, trying to understand what Jacob was doing. Then, the puppy made a soft noise. Not a cry, more like a call, and the lead dog stopped. He tilted his head, took another step. Jacob didn't move. Slowly, cautiously, he removed the puppy from his shoulder and held it out in his hands. Not too far, not threatening, just showing. I found him on the rock, Jacob whispered, barely above the sound of the stream. I didn't mean to scare you. The lead dog sniffed the air, then came closer. A few steps. His paws made soft splashes in the water. Now he was just a foot away from Jacob. Jacob's hands trembled slightly, but he didn't pull back. The lead dog stepped closer still and gently touched his nose to the puppy's wet fur. The puppy licked his snout and curled into his legs. The other dogs approached now, one by one, surrounding the pair. Jacob stayed perfectly still, soaked to the waist, knees in the mud, holding his breath. The pack didn't attack. They didn't bark. They gathered around the puppy and started licking him, sniffing him, nudging him softly. The mother, Jacob guessed it was the mother, a sleek golden female with tired eyes, whimpered and licked the puppy's head again and again. Jacob's heart cracked open. Right there in that river, he gently placed the puppy on the ground in front of them and backed away slowly. The pack didn't stop him. They were too busy checking on their baby, too busy making sure he was safe, too busy showing love. Jacob didn't dare stand up right away. He just knelt there in the cold water, watching something that felt sacred, a quiet reunion that almost didn't happen, a moment that would have never been possible if he hadn't taken that step into the stream. But even now, as the puppy curled up against what was clearly its mother, Jacob couldn't help but feel uneasy. These dogs were still wild, still unpredictable. One sudden move, one misread signal, and this peaceful moment could turn into something else entirely. The pack wasn't growling, but they also weren't inviting him closer. They were focused on the puppy. Every lick, every nudge, every soft whimper, it all spoke of something deeper than instinct. It was love, raw, wordless love. And Jacob realized this wasn't just a lost pup. This was a rescue that had almost failed, a life that could have been washed away without anyone even noticing. But they had noticed. The pack had followed. The pack had waited. How long had they been watching? How close had they been when he first stepped into the river? Did they trust him, or were they simply desperate? He didn't know, and maybe he never would. Minutes passed. The puppy, now visibly more relaxed, had nestled between two of the older dogs. Its breathing slower, more steady. Its fur, though still wet, had stopped shivering. Jacob finally, carefully, stood up. He moved slowly, not making eye contact, just taking a step back toward the bank, where his backpack still lay. The lead dog turned slightly, watching him, but didn't move to stop him. That gave Jacob the tiniest bit of comfort. He picked up his bag and slung it over one shoulder, still dripping wet. His camera, thankfully sealed in its waterproof case, had been spared, but that wasn't what mattered. He glanced over his shoulder one last time. The pack hadn't left yet. They were still there, all 5 of them now, standing in the shallow water, heads close, bodies pressed together. And then, something strange happened. The mother dog looked up, her eyes met his, and for a brief second, Jacob felt something pass between them. Not fear, not warning, something else. Gratitude. It was as if she knew, as if, somehow, in whatever way animals understand the world, she knew that he had saved her baby. Jacob nodded softly, not even sure why. He turned and started walking back up the trail. The forest was still quiet, the breeze gentle, but something had changed. Everything had changed. And yet, the weight of what had just happened didn't fully hit him until he was nearly a mile away, back where the forest started to thin, where sunlight touched the grass in long golden lines. He stopped and sat down on a fallen log, took a breath, tried to process. Why had that puppy been alone on that rock? Had the current swept it away from its family? Had it been playing too far from the pack? Had someone separated them? That question stuck with him, because the more he thought about it, the more it didn't add up. Puppies don't usually wander far from their mothers, especially not at that age. And that rock, it wasn't just close to the edge, it was in the stream, the kind of spot a puppy would never reach on its own. The more Jacob considered it, the more a darker possibility began to creep into his thoughts. What if someone had placed the puppy there? What if it wasn't an accident? It didn't make sense. Who would do that? But then again, he'd seen terrible things before. Animals tied to trees, abandoned by roads, left to starve behind dumpsters. People could be cruel. And this puppy? This puppy looked too clean. No injuries, no cuts, just scared, just lost. And something about that didn't sit right with him. Maybe he'd interrupted something. Maybe his presence had changed more than he realized. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and opened the map, dropped a pin right where the rescue had happened. "I need to remember this spot," he whispered. He didn't know why. Maybe to come back later. Maybe to see if the pack was still around. Maybe to understand what really happened. But deep down, something told him the story wasn't over. Not yet. Back in town later that evening, Jacob sat in his apartment, wrapped in a dry hoodie, staring out the window. He hadn't told anyone. Not yet. It wasn't the kind of story you could casually drop into conversation. It felt personal, almost too big to explain with words. How do you explain the look in that dog's eyes? How do you explain the silence? The way they surrounded him, not with aggression, but with something that felt like understanding. He thought about the puppy, thought about its tiny heartbeat, fluttering against his shoulder, thought about how close it came to being lost forever. He couldn't shake it. The image played over and over in his mind. The rock, the current, the eyes staring from the trees, and the feeling he had when he realized he wasn't alone. That moment, that chill up his spine when he turned around and saw 4 dogs watching from the edge. It hadn't been fear. Not really. It was something deeper, older, instinct, the unspoken knowledge that he was being judged, not as a threat, not as prey, but as a witness, as a decision, as a moment in their story. They had trusted him, even if only for a minute, and he had done the right thing. That night, Jacob opened his laptop and started writing, not for the internet, not for social media, just for himself. He described the trees, the trail, the sound of the water. He described the puppy's eyes. He wrote about the stare from the lead dog, the way it stepped into the water without fear. And he wrote about the feeling, the one that told him something greater was at work, that he had become part of something ancient and quiet and powerful. The next morning, he went back. Same trail, same camera, same backpack. When he reached the river, he stood still for a long time. No dogs, no puppy, just silence. But in the mud near the edge, paw prints, small ones, big ones, a trail leading back into the woods. He smiled. They were safe. They had moved on, but they had left a sign, just enough to say, "We were here." Jacob stood for a while, then raised his camera and snapped a photo of the paw prints in the morning light. That photo would become one of his most treasured images, not because of how it looked, but because of what it meant. A moment of connection, a second chance, a life saved and a life changed, all because of a sound he could have ignored and a choice he didn't hesitate to make. Jacob stood at the riverbank the next day, staring at the paw prints. He didn't know what he expected to find. Maybe the dogs would still be nearby. Maybe the puppy would run back to him, wagging its tiny tail like they'd known each other forever. But the forest was still, quiet, just like before. Still, something felt different now. He looked down at the trail of prints pressed into the mud, leading back into the thick woods, then vanishing into the undergrowth. The fact that they were here told him one thing. The pack had come back after he left. They didn't run. They didn't disappear for good. They came back. That meant something. He took a few steps toward the prints, crouched down, and touched one gently. It was fresh, maybe just a few hours old. The edges were still sharp, not yet softened by wind or time. His heart beat a little faster. What if they were still watching? What if they were nearby, just out of sight? He stood up slowly and scanned the trees. Nothing moved, but something in his gut told him they were there, somewhere. Maybe not close, maybe not ready, but there. Jacob didn't chase after them. He didn't call out. He just sat down on a flat rock near the water and waited. He stayed for nearly an hour, watching, listening. Birds chirped overhead. A squirrel darted through the underbrush. A dragonfly zipped past his knee, but no dogs. Eventually, he stood, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and headed back to town. But he knew he'd be coming back. That week, Jacob returned every day. Each time, he brought something with him. Not his camera, not his laptop, something simpler, something that spoke in a language dogs understood. Food. The first day, he left a small container of chicken near the edge of the clearing. The next day, it was slices of turkey and a shallow dish of water. He never stayed long. He would leave the food, sit quietly for 10 or 15 minutes, then walk away. At first, nothing happened, but on the fourth day, he found the food gone and new paw prints in the dirt, smaller ones, the puppy's size. He smiled. They were still around, still watching, still deciding. By the seventh day, he started to hear them, not clearly, just soft rustles in the distance, a snapping twig, a shifting branch, always behind him, always just far enough to avoid being seen. They were testing him, and he understood. Animals like this didn't give trust freely, not after what they'd likely seen, not after what they'd been through. Stray dogs don't survive in a forest by being careless. They survive by being cautious, quiet, invisible. Jacob respected that, so he kept coming. He never forced it, never chased, never raised his voice. He let them lead. 2 weeks later, everything changed. It was a Sunday morning, just after sunrise. The light was soft, the air damp with dew. Jacob brought a small bag of cooked beef, a few strips of bacon, and some kibble soaked in broth. He placed the food in a shallow bowl near the clearing and stepped back, as always. But this time, he didn't sit on a rock. He stayed standing. Something in his gut told him to wait. He was about to turn around and leave when he heard a soft noise behind him, a low, cautious whine. He froze. Then slowly, so slowly, he turned his head. There, just 10 feet away, standing between two trees, was the puppy. A little bigger now, a little steadier on its feet, but unmistakably the same pup he'd pulled from the river. Jacob didn't move. The puppy took one step forward, then another. Its nose sniffed the air. Its tail twitched nervously. It was looking straight at him. Jacob squatted slowly, bringing himself lower to the ground. He didn't speak. He didn't reach out. He just waited. The puppy crept forward, 3 feet, then 4. Then it stopped. The moment stretched forever. Then it barked. Just once. Short, sharp. Jacob almost laughed, but he held it in. That tiny bark felt like a breakthrough. The puppy walked up to the bowl, sniffed the food, then looked back at the trees. Jacob followed its gaze, and that's when he saw them. The pack. All 4 adult dogs, standing in the shadows, watching, waiting. He realized then, they hadn't left. Not for a second. They had been there, every single day, just out of sight. They had watched him return, watched him bring food, watched him stay quiet. They had been deciding, and now they were ready. The puppy ate, slowly at first, then faster. Jacob still didn't move. He knew the adults were still unsure, still alert. One wrong move could ruin everything. But when the puppy finished, something happened that made Jacob's throat tighten. It walked back to him, 6 tiny steps, then sat at his feet, and looked up. Jacob didn't move at first, but after a moment, he reached out, hand open, fingers stretched. The puppy sniffed his hand and licked it. Jacob exhaled, finally letting himself smile. He looked up. The adults were still watching. Then, to his surprise, the lead dog stepped out of the shadows. No growling, no barking. He just walked, straight to the puppy, then to Jacob, close, closer. Jacob held his breath. The dog stopped just a few feet away, stared, then, like before, nudged Jacob's hand with his nose. Soft, careful, deliberate. It was a sign, a quiet one, but powerful. They trusted him now. Not completely, not yet, but enough. From that day on, everything changed. The dogs didn't hide anymore. They waited for him. They greeted him at the edge of the forest. Sometimes, the puppy would run to him first, tail wagging, tongue out, tripping over his own feet. Jacob never tried to touch the adults. He didn't need to. He showed up. He brought food. He sat with them. He let them come to him. And over time they did. The mother dog began sitting closer. The younger male once laid down just a few feet away. The oldest, most cautious one started to sniff Jacob's backpack. They were becoming something he never expected, a second family. Not pets, not strays, but companions. Jacob started keeping a journal. He named the puppy Milo. He gave each adult a name: Bear, Willow, Ghost, and Scout. He wrote down their habits, where they slept, how they moved, how they cared for each other. He wasn't just visiting anymore. He was learning, documenting, understanding, and with every page he wrote, his respect for them deepened. They weren't just surviving, they were living, loving, protecting, and somewhere in that process, they had chosen to let him in. One day, Jacob arrived with a plan. He brought a small collar, soft, loose, safe, and a tag that read Milo. He didn't force it. He let the puppy sniff it, let him play with it. It took days, but eventually, Milo let him slip it on. The tag jingled softly as he bounced around the trees. Jacob took a photo. Milo collar, tag, tail wagging, running toward the camera with his ears flopping wildly. He uploaded it to his computer that night and stared at it for a long time. He realized that photo meant more than all his wildlife shots combined, because it wasn't just a moment captured. It was a story, a rescue, a friendship, a quiet promise that had grown into something unforgettable. It had been almost 3 months since Jacob first stepped into that river and pulled Milo from the current. 3 months of quiet visits, shared meals, cautious glances turned into calm greetings. The forest no longer felt like a mystery to him. It had become a second home, a sacred place only he and the dogs seemed to understand. Milo had grown so much in that time. He wasn't a fragile, trembling puppy anymore. Now he bounded through the trees like he owned them, his golden fur brighter, his legs stronger. He responded to Jacob's voice. He came when called. He even started doing little circles whenever Jacob unpacked his food bowl, hopping on his paws like he couldn't wait. But Jacob knew, no matter how close he got, these dogs were still wild. They trusted him, yes, but they didn't belong to him. They belonged to the forest. And that's why what happened next felt like a betrayal, not by them, but by the world outside. It started with a sound. Jacob was walking along the trail with a bag of food in one hand and Milo's old rope toy in the other. He had just reached the clearing where he usually found the pack waiting, but today, they weren't there. He paused, set the bag down, scanned the trees. Nothing. No rustling leaves, no scampering paws, no excited bark, just silence. Then he heard it, a sharp crack in the distance, followed by another, and then a bark, but not Milo's. This one was loud, desperate, fearful. Jacob's pulse jumped. He dropped everything and ran. His boots pounded the trail as he sprinted through the brush, ducking under branches, jumping roots. The forest blurred around him. All he could hear now were more barks, more cracking sounds, voices, human voices, shouting. He burst through a thicket and skidded to a stop. His chest heaved, his heart raced, and then he saw them. Men, 3 of them, wearing camouflage jackets and holding long, black rifles, and beyond them the dogs. The pack, scattered, panicked. Ghost was barking wildly, circling the group. Willow was backed into a corner near a tree stump. Scout was limping. Milo was nowhere in sight. "Hey!" Jacob shouted, storming forward. "What are you doing?" One of the men turned, startled. "Get back," he barked. "These dogs are dangerous." "They're not dangerous," Jacob snapped. "They're strays. I've been feeding them for months. They're not hurting anyone. They're attacking livestock." Another man growled. "They're wild. They're a threat." Jacob couldn't believe what he was hearing. "They're not wild," he said. "They're scared. You're scaring them." The lead man raised his rifle and pointed it toward Ghost, who was now baring his teeth, hackles up. "Get back," the man shouted again. "I'm not warning you again. Don't you dare." Jacob started, stepping forward. A gunshot split the air. Jacob froze. The bullet hit a tree a few feet away from Ghost, who bolted into the woods with a yelp. Willow darted after him. Scout followed, limping. Jacob's ears rang. His body shook. "You fired a gun," he said, barely able to get the words out. "Are you out of your mind?" The third man finally spoke. "We were sent here by animal control. Someone reported a dangerous dog pack. We're following orders." Jacob stared at them, stunned. "I've been coming here every day. They're not a danger. They're protective, but only if they're threatened." The man shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Report says they've attacked farm animals. That's all they care about." Jacob's voice cracked. "What about the puppy?" That made all 3 men stop. "What puppy?" the leader asked. "Golden fur. Small. New collar. His name's Milo," Jacob said, his voice trembling now. "Where is he?" The men exchanged glances. Then the third man nodded toward the trail. "We saw a small one run that way. Might have gotten hit." Jacob didn't wait. He turned and ran again, heart pounding harder than before. Every branch that slapped his face, every root that nearly tripped him, he didn't care. He just kept calling, "Milo, Milo." Nothing. "Milo, come here, boy. Please." Still nothing. He kept running. Then, just ahead, he saw it. A small shape curled under a bush. His heart stopped. He dropped to his knees and crawled forward. "Milo," he whispered. The puppy let out the weakest whine. Jacob reached out. Blood. There was blood. Not a lot, but enough. A graze across the side. Fur matted. Eyes barely open. "Oh my God." He scooped him up carefully, cradling the puppy close. "You're okay," he whispered. "You're okay. I got you." Milo didn't move much, but his tail twitched once. It was all Jacob needed. He turned and ran, back toward his jeep, back toward town, back toward help. He wasn't losing him. Not now. Not after everything. The next 24 hours were a blur. The vet worked fast, said it was a clean graze. Bullet hadn't gone deep. Milo had lost some blood and was in shock, but he'd live. Jacob didn't leave his side once. He slept in the waiting room chair, fed him chicken broth from his palm, held his paw while he whimpered through the night. And when Milo finally opened his eyes the next morning and licked Jacob's fingers, Jacob cried. 3 days later, Jacob returned to the forest. Alone, Milo needed rest, but Jacob had something to say. He walked to the clearing and set the food down. Then he waited. Minutes passed. Then movement. Willow stepped out first, then Scout, then Ghost, and finally, Bear. They stared at him in silence. He knelt, hands open. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know they were coming. I would have stopped them if I could." The dogs didn't move, but they didn't run either. Then slowly, Willow walked forward, stopped inches from Jacob, and licked his hand. He closed his eyes. They forgave him, or maybe they knew he never betrayed them. He was still theirs, and they were still his. 2 weeks later, the story made the local news. Nature photographer stops shooting of forest dogs. The town took notice. So did animal rescue groups. And one group stepped in to help. They worked with Jacob to register the dogs as a protected colony, gave them food, veterinary care, vaccinations, even built small shelters in the forest for storms. And Jacob, he kept visiting every single day. Milo stayed with him now, officially adopted. Collar, papers, the works, but they still went back to the trees, back to the stream, back to the place where it all began. Sometimes, Jacob would sit on the same rock in the river and watch the dogs play around him. And sometimes, he'd catch the mother dog looking at him. That same look, the one from the very first day, the one that said, "We remember." Jacob never set out to be a hero. He didn't go into that forest looking to change lives. And yet, that one choice, stepping into a cold stream for a helpless puppy, became the spark that changed everything. He saved Milo, and Milo, in a way, saved him right back. What started as a quiet act of kindness turned into something bigger, a bond between man and nature that most people never get to experience. The dogs who once hid in the shadows now greet him like family. The forest, once silent, now sings with wagging tails and playful barks. And every time Jacob looks at Milo, healed, happy, and safe, he's reminded of how fragile life is and how powerful one moment can be. Because sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't just help someone else. It helps you find who you were always meant to be. All because he listened to a whimper and didn't walk away. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories like this one.